Welcome back, Scott.
Morning.
I'm gonna drill your brain and soak up your knowledge about menstrual cycle, how it affects women who want to feel better, more energetic. Uh, we've talked about, you mentioned many times different weeks. You might want to have different strategies if you're really pedantic about those things. Do you want to break it down? What happens in each week? What kind of energy would you expect from women? How it affects motivation, how it affects recovery from training sessions, what's happening with appetite, and all those kind of things.
Um, yeah, sure. To be honest, most of my clients don't seem to worry that much about the different weeks of the menstrual cycle. It you typically isn't impacting them to the point where they want to or need to do anything specific to deal with it. They're just I don't know, just programmed a certain way or whatever that they don't typically worry too much about it. But what is quite common is the menstrual cycle is broken down into two phases, like follicular and luteal. And some people even say early follicular, late follicular, early luteal, and late luteal. So that would be your theoretical 4 weeks. And the major difference between follicular and luteal is the levels of estrogen and progesterone. And that's really the two main players when it comes to sex hormones and their impact on physiology and recovery and libido and all that kind of stuff. So in the follicular phase, which would be day one of menses until ovulation, which in theory is the middle of the menstrual cycle. So most of the time, if you look into the literature, the cycle is considered to be 28 days, give or take. I think normal is considered 24 to 32 days, but they typically break it down into 28, and then therefore they're doing 4 weeks, sorry, 4 7 week blocks. Um, so day one of menses would be the early follicular phase, and at that point, and we've talked about this many times, estrogen starts to rise drastically, and then the late follicular phase leading into ovulation is when estrogen peaks before it basically drops off. Um, Testosterone is the other hormone there that's worth mentioning with the female menstrual cycle. In that ovulation phase, which is only a few days in the middle of the cycle, testosterone will blip up a little bit. You'll usually see a spike in their basal body temperature. Libido sometimes goes up, usually. Probably from a biological point of view, it's because they're ovulating. So if their libido is up and they're ovulating, it kind of makes sense for reproduction. And then you get into the follicular, or sorry, the luteal phase where progesterone becomes the predominant hormone. And really, the major things that are, I mean, there's millions of little nuanced things that you could be, micromanaging if you wanted to. But the major things is the difference between the levels of estrogen and progesterone, their effects on blood sugar and insulin resistance, water retention, your primary fuel source, whether it's carbohydrates or fats, and your overall sort of mood. Those are the two major players, in my opinion. And like I say, some females, and I do work with a few, and I have worked with many over the years, where it was in their best interest to cycle week to week, but it does involve a lot of very, very detailed efforts, right? Like you might want to be increasing carbohydrates in the follicular phase because estrogen does increase insulin sensitivity. Estrogen is good for hypertrophy indirectly by basically aiding in the glucose uptake, improving collagen synthesis and stuff in the joints, so you can exert more force to your lifts. But again, I think for most people, I wouldn't start there. I would just have a consistent lifestyle put in place and then start to tweak it where you find that it might be beneficial. And that might be, a macronutrient distribution change from follicular to luteal or something, but I wouldn't go there right away. when I work with female powerlifters, and I trained a woman in South Africa who has the world record for the strongest female ever on the continent. She's a powerlifter. Um, we didn't really bother with this because at that point, when you're at that level, drugs trump everything and none of this stuff matters anymore. But I have also worked with some natural powerlifters. And in that scenario, I think it's in their best interest to try to plan their performance sports in that follicular phase when estrogen is higher because they're a little bit more insulin sensitive. They have more ability to, with glucose uptake, they have more ability to exert force because the connective tissue is a little bit more, I don't know if you want to call it stiff, possibly tendon stiffness and stuff because of estradiol being elevated. But again, I think that's getting pretty micromanaged to a point.
So when you're looking at these, have you ever noticed, or would you experiment with having someone to check their sex hormones every week and then predetermine maybe, hey, you know what? We know this is happening, that's happening, that's happening. What if you had time and resources to do that, would you find it valuable?
Yes, I wish. I wish I had that opportunity. Um, I have one client that we were pretty close checking it that regularly, but it wasn't for menstrual cycle because she's in menopause, so it wasn't an option. But we were checking very, very regular blood work to see how they were measuring certain things. Um, and it was a lot, but in Canada, it's almost never going to happen. Your doctors are not going to play along.
Let's see.
But if I had that option, I would absolutely do that because I think you can learn quite a bit. Um, and it's not so much just for performance, but you'll be able to find more patterns and trends with how is your appetite, how are your cravings, how's your mood, how's your libido, how's your energy, and you'll be able to correlate that very well to a hormone level. And I think if you can check blood work regularly, you can get pretty accurate, and then you have an idea of what levels to shoot for if and when, and seemingly it's when, you go on HRT because that's what everyone's doing now. And then you kind of have an idea. Yeah, I know that these levels, I feel X. And that's helpful because when we get into the perimenopausal phase where women are starting to get very volatile hormone levels, and they're starting to consider HRT, like I'm working with a couple right now that are doing this, we have to get a hormone level established via modality of whatever the doctor is giving us, and then we have to see, okay, what is that giving you? And you have to get enough time for the pharmacokinetics to take effect and see, okay, I have these levels, I feel this. Now we make an adjustment and wait again and wait again and wait again. So you could potentially save yourself a lot of time if you could check regular bloods and just see where those values are. And that would be very informative for sure.
To me, what I'm interested in is like if someone is like natural and they come to you and they go, hey, I'm at this phase of my cycle. If you have the ability to tell them, hey, I've seen this before, you probably have really good appetite, or you probably have a lot of energy, you probably have a lot of good sleep, or so on and so forth. If there is some kind of trend that you have observed, if that you can take advantage of, or maybe you have some kind of numbers in your like diaries from previous clients that tell you already what kind of like an effort or performance to expect from girls you work with? Have you got something like that collected, or have you got any like numbers you would want them to be at?
No, not numbers because everyone's normal values is complete individual,
Right.
but you definitely see the trend of elevated hormone values. So elevated estrogen gives you insulin sensitivity, gives you these things. Elevated progesterone, kind of the opposite. So if we know what phase of the menstrual cycle we are in, we have an understanding of what to do if needed. But the actual numbers, it would depend on what their numbers are because everyone's numbers are so different. It's kind of like with a male testosterone, like normal, is, 396 nanograms per deciliter to 1,000. That's normal. That's a 700-point spread. So somebody's normal
Yeah.
might be 500, somebody's normal might be 900. But definitely you see, and Lyle's work documents this very well, obviously, you definitely see estrogen gives you X symptoms or benefits or effects, and progesterone gives these. And so then you kind of compare. The common thing would be if you're in a fat loss phase, which seemingly most women are seemingly always wanting to be in, and you're in that luteal phase where progesterone is higher, you probably want to lower the carbohydrates to a degree because insulin sensitivity is not as high or insulin resistance is higher. So bombing your system with carbohydrates is going to make things a little bit more stressful on everybody, including your physiology. So it would make sense to adjust the macronutrient distribution there if it's needed. And I have, like I say, I've done that with females, and it is absolutely beneficial, but it's a lot of extra work. And some people just don't have the time or the patience to do that kind of stuff. And for many, it's not necessary. Drug users, it just doesn't matter. Everything gets trumped by the drug. But it is something that's a good practice. And if you're starting new, and I typically assess this with new clients based on their responses to my assessment forms. I have quite a few questions that talk about their menstrual cycle. And when they detail me the information of their cycle, I know right away if I need to bother with some of these nuanced things because they are powerful, but there are a lot of additional work. So I get a feel for how serious the client is and how detailed they're going to be, and then I get an idea of how regular or irregular is their menstrual cycle, and should I bother with carb cycling essentially, or even calorie cycling, depending. But it is something I think females should be aware of for sure.
Because more often than yeah, in Canada it's very complex procedure just to get any blood test.
It's brutal, and they won't give you what you need. They'll give you,
Yeah.
like, if you have a thyroid, if you want a thyroid panel check, they'll check TSH, but that doesn't really necessarily tell us anything.
Yeah.
Like, I have a client that has Hashimoto's, and they check her TSH level only. Like, well, that's not do anything. Like, what are you learning from that? We already know there's a problem. You need to know what your thyroid's doing, and it's just like pulling teeth here. It's
It's an
brutal.
uphill battle, but like I was in New York and I was speaking to we were like networking, and so there were some girls and I was talking to them, and they go to me like, yeah, but you're not a doctor. I'm like, I don't care. Your doctor is an idiot. He's an imbecile. He doesn't understand how to read a blood test. I'm like, just because he's got an MD in US, it's so easy to hang that doctor's label next to their name. It's absurd. In UK, they wouldn't even be named like that. They wouldn't get anywhere. The standard of like how people name earn those titles is just absurd. But again,
It is, and the same goes here. And the issue that I have here with the doctors is not that they're dumb or idiots, because they're not. They're intelligent, but they don't have context, and it's not their fault they don't have context. But the problem I have is they don't ask for it either. They just see a
yes,
blood test and say, "Oh, you need this drug." Well, maybe that's there on purpose. Like, I have a client that we have very high triglycerides right before a blood test, but we're administering a drug that mobilizes fatty acids into his blood so he can burn them off. And his doctor saw these elevated triglycerides and he was freaking out. I'm like, well, we made them elevated on purpose. That's just telling us that the drug is working. And the doctor's freaking out. I'm like, there's nothing to be freaking out here about. This is intentional. So if they don't ask for context, they don't have anything to really use to give you, I think, proper information. And they just end up throwing you under the blanket with some general whatever, protocol. Here's your fucking drug, whatever it is. And I have an issue with that.
yeah, it's a skill for sure because they've taught so many things that this is kind of overlooked, and
Yeah,
they just majority of times they just Google answer, and
I think so too.
and
I
it
think
says
so too.
absolutely nothing unless you like should sit down and talk to person. Uh, what about other hormones? So you mentioned two main ones, progesterone, estrogen. What other hormones are involved in menstrual cycle? What's happening there?
Well, obviously, like the luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone are all there too, but this is all part of the reproductive cycle.
Right.
So all these things have to kind of run in sync with each other because the body is theoretically evolving to ovulate and get pregnant. So I don't think it's necessary to be worrying about those things. As a natural athlete, I think it would be most beneficial for a natural athlete to just train and adjust if necessary their training and or their nutrition based on the two follicular luteal phases, and that would be plenty. And if you're not a natural athlete anymore, it doesn't matter anymore. Because, I mean, within reason, because if you're taking in exogenous hormones, your LH and FSH are going to get skewed automatically because you are now administering an exogenous hormone. And depending on what compounds you're using, that can then influence progesterone and estrogen as well. So it almost is, unfortunately, the simplest answer is like, if you use drugs, don't worry about it, because everything that you're taking is going to trump everything. And if you don't, I still don't think there's a lot to worry about, because what are you going to end up doing? You're going to end up going to some, vitamin hippie guru shop. They're going to try to sell you all these supplements that just aren't going to do anything. Like I see all the time, like, I'm estrogen dominant. I'm like, what? No. And they're taking dim and eat broccoli and dim and eat broccoli. Like, this is just a big waste of time. Um, so I wouldn't. I would just, like I said, I would, assuming the cycle is regular, I would just be training according and eating according to compliance. And if compliance is being threatened because you are bedridden for the first few days of your menstrual cycle, okay, then maybe we want to adjust training parameters and nutrition because of that. That would make sense to me. Or if you really notice you can't keep your lifts up in the luteal phase, maybe we change the training parameters to compensate for the progesterone elevated cycle phase of the cycle. That would make sense to me. But I would still always try to start with the basic. And most of the time, that's enough. Only when you're getting to either very lean levels of body fat that need to be removed or higher levels of athleticism do I find it becomes more relevant to start micromanaging the menstrual cycle. And it does work and it is powerful. But like I say, it is a lot more work. So it's kind of like, is the, is that amount of detailed micromanaging worth your time? And then that's an individual thing.
How does this change when somebody's taking a pill? Because in UK it's very popular for girls to just take contraceptive and forget about it forever. So what kind of shifts do happen there hormonally? Does it affect their ability to be leaner, healthier? What's happening there?
So that's a broad subject. And I know that we're actually going to dig into that one, I think, on the next video. So we can tackle that one then. But large, that'll come down to if it is the pill, as in you actually taking birth control pills, it's usually a 21 or 28-day cycle with, 5 or 7 sugar pills after. Or if you're taking like an IUD or a depot shot or something like that, those things are all sort of different. And then it depends on if is it a progestin only birth control, or is it a combo, generation 1, 2, 3, or whatever. Like, there's a lot of niche things that need to be considered. In Canada right now, recently especially, IUDs are being pushed, which I find interesting. They're even being utilized in HRT now. I actually had a client that checked in this morning who is going to meet with her gyno today to have an IUD implemented, because that is what they're going to use for the progesterone side of her HRT. They're going to administer a progestin via the IUD. I have my thoughts on that. We've discussed that. So we're going to go with the doctor and see how this plays out. But it does have an impact. But again, it depends on the modality they're using for birth control. But I think if we can unbag all that at the next video, get into it.
Yeah, it does look they are still experimenting with everyone.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know, I seemingly go through phases. And currently, I'm at the place where I think they have to be experimenting, because they're still learning all the time as well. And I think, unfortunately, this is how it's always been. It's an experiment. I do believe they're, how do I say this? I don't think they're trying. I don't think everything is a conspiracy. I don't. I think there potentially are some conspiracy things happening for sure. But I don't think in general everything is pure evil. I think to some degree we have to experiment. They've done the trials in this. the next step is a human. Like, where else can you go? You know, you've killed all the mice, you kill all the rats, all the monkeys, or whatever you're doing. You got to go to a human at some point. So I'm not against that whatsoever. I do think it matters, but I think the next decade we're going to see a lot of interesting things because HRT in females, where I'm at, anyways, here, and the work I do with in the States, it is the buzzword. Like everyone is on HRT. And I think it's the same with men. All the fucking evidence-based natties that have been on TRT the whole time, and they're TRT, they're claiming themselves to still be natty. Meanwhile, they run like 1,000 nanograms per deciliter every day, all year round, never stop. And that's saying like, yeah, I'm natty, and clearly you're not. I think it's the same. The women now are getting, I'm in this HRT group. There's 20-year-old women in this group going on HRT. And if you look at their profiles, they're clearly in the fitness industry. They're clearly about how they look. They clearly don't need hormone replacement therapy. They fucking want it. We
Yeah.
all know this, and they're getting it. And so I think over the next 10 years, as women start to get heart problems the way men have gotten who've been abusing testosterone, you're going to see this now becoming a little bit more of a female problem, which we're not used to seeing because they're running high levels of androgens and not aware that in 10 years from now, they're going to be having blood clots and cardiovascular issues. So, and because HRT is not really, you know, depends, I guess, where you live. It's not really 100% approved. There, it's all an experiment. There's no normal, quote unquote, normal level of testosterone administration for a female. And so the HRT girls that are pro testosterone think that they can have whatever level they want. It's not a problem because there is no safe upper level because it's not in research. Yet we know your entire life, your peak hormones, even at the healthiest time of reproduction, your testosterone level never got over 70, right? And now they're running 250 and they think that's okay.
Mm.
We also see that we run 250, a level of 250 in transgender. So how can they think this? But they do. So I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot of experimenting happening for sure, almost being forced because these women are taking it because they feel good. But in 5 years, when they have a 5 o'clock shadow, there's going to be all kinds of fucking, new research coming out saying this, this, and this.
Yeah, it's crazy because they do all this, especially with like gender change and whatnot, and then they are still talking about how, oh, you're taking steroids, it's bad for you. Like, why are you giving it to kids then?
Mm-hmm.
In
Yeah.
way higher dosages than guys take. It's just like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
absurd. But obviously on TV, you just hear about like, hey, this is helping them, and no, it's not. Mentally,
That is one of the things that I find. Um, I don't know why this is interesting. How steroids are so taboo, yet used everywhere when it's in their interest. But other than that, no, they're bad. They're bad. They're bad. Athletes, you're cheating using steroids, yet you're administering them to kids and mothers and women in the menopause. Like, I don't understand where that all
yeah,
stems
the
from.
label is different. It's HRT. It's not steroid. It's like, yeah,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
exactly what guys take to probably
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you do, but okay.
Well, there's a very, very, very popular natty bodybuilding champion who's very influential in the fitness industry, who claims to be natty, who takes TRT, so he keeps his range in the normal, right at the top level. But prior to TRT, his normal was at the low range his whole life. Now he's at the upper range. Well, that's major, major, major difference. Like that's like a 10x fucking bump in testosterone. I don't think you can call yourself a natty when you're taking levels that are twice what they used to be because those are not your normal levels. Those are fucking completely exacerbated. So that's a whole sketchy. That's a whole lying HRT TRT thing because all the evidence-based people that claim all this stuff, I would argue they were using stuff all along.
Yeah, and for everyone's different. Obviously, I just done my blood test, and my blood test is always obscene. I think my normal testosterone was 32, which is way
You guys
above.
get to 29 in the UK, right? Or
Yeah,
30?
well, I need to double check. Let me see if I can pull up my testosterone was. Yeah, so the range is between 12 to 30 nanomoles per liter, and
Yeah,
my
30.
my natty is 32.
Right.
So one, and then somebody is just jacked up to gills.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I would say, like, on somebody that's hypermuscular like yourself, 32, uh, like some people say, like, oh, super physiological levels is bad, bad, bad. Well, if you were a 150-pound dad bod and your testosterone that level was that high, it clearly wouldn't be that high naturally. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a 150-pound dad bod.
Yeah.
So it could be causing some health marker issues down the road. But for you, 32, I bet you could live there forever and never have anything but health benefits.
Yeah, and it's a difference between like where you live and how you live. Obviously, like
Yeah.
my lifestyle habits are completely different to majority of people. But
Mhm.
bring it back to girls, is there anything that you would suggest them to change habit-wise from one cycle, like phase of the cycle to other one to even further enhance, let's say, insulin sensitivity or prevent insulin resistance in a certain time or so on and so forth? Would there be any lifestyle choices, benefits that you would suggest personally?
The most common, the most common one I do utilize, and again, it's not all the time, but when I do, it's usually this one. It's usually the carb to fat ratio of macronutrients based on the phases. Because my most of my clients are performance based. So not only does that make sense from an insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance point of view, but it makes sense for their type of training they're doing as well. So in the follicular phase, if I'm going to be making any kind of adjustments based on the menstrual cycle, that's usually the first one I'm going to do. I'm going to bias a little bit more carbohydrates in that follicular phase of the cycle versus the luteal phase. And what that typically means depends on if they're in an energy deficit or not. Sometimes I do, I don't know if this is ethically correct or not, but I don't care. I'll tell you the truth. I will literally sometimes in my female clients bump the carbs up in the follicular phase and not adjust them anywhere. So technically, I put them into a surplus and I don't say anything um, because it will never generate body fat to a point that we can measure. And what it does ensure is that they are eating, and therefore I'm getting the most out of their training. And by the time I'm doing that to one of my clients, I already have them comfortable with body weight, so I'm not worried about body weight fluctuations because they know how I am with their body weight, and we just disprove the potential weight gain from food because the calipers show that it's not body fat. So I have them under control in terms of not worrying about body weight. But I'll do that. I will put some carbs into them and say that, oh yeah, we'll just adjust it over the cycle, and sometimes I won't, because I would actually rather see a female eating at least enough or too much than not enough, because too many of them for too often or for too long are eating not enough, and that's actually more detrimental long term, and I don't think that's the greatest idea.
Have you got a
So
specific number of amount of carbs you would suggest for women who are listening now to try in specific ways to add or subtract or?
not really, no, but what I would say is body weight depending. Like there's a pretty big range of body weights. Obviously, like I have one female that's 104 pounds. I have one female like that's 210. So it does matter, but typically for I don't know if you even can say an average size female, but say a female in the 130 to 160-ish pound range, 170-pound range. if you start tipping your carbs below 100 grams a day of net carbohydrates, you're starting to how do I word this? You're starting to create a scenario or an environment where the body might not have sufficient carbohydrates and it might be trying to produce more ketones. And therefore, you're kind of like on the fence of, am I in a ketogenic phase or am I not? And that actually can cause a little bit more physiological stress on the body. So I would say if the carbs have to start getting down, flirting with anywhere from 80 to 100, I would just make a decision. Like fucking go down deep in, like 50 or less, or get away from that. Because if you're kind of on the fence, it's kind of not great to be. It's kind of like, where am I going? What direction am I going? But that does depend on the person. I have seen people be in a ketogenic state with well over 100 grams of carbs.
Mm.
I've seen people need to be under 30 grams of carbs to get into ketosis. So that would be the only thing I would consider. But unless you are very sedentary and your training is very much marathon-ish, you probably shouldn't be getting your carbs that low anyway. And the people that are probably in that ketogenic carbophobe sort of demographic that has been so popular for so long that I'm hoping is sort of dying off, because you typically, unless you are in an energy deficit deep enough that you have no choice, you typically don't need to take your carbs that low. But carbs have this terrible reputation of causing weight gain because a gram of carbs brings 3 grams of water. So you will gain weight if you eat carbs, but it's not fat and it has a bad reputation. So I literally was actually, for the first time in probably 2 years, I went out on this past Saturday and I actually had a couple drinks, which I never do. And I was on a bus going to a baseball game. And the bus was like 40 people on this bus. And there was a girl beside me and she took out this Tupperware and she was offering these people. I said, "What is that?" It looks like one of those egg bite things you get from the coffee shop. She goes, "It's the keto muffin." I said, "A what?" And she said the keto muffin. And then she went on to me about how bad carbs are, and I was just, I can't talk to this person. Like, just go over there and eat your keto muffin. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And
It's
so that would be my only potential consideration is if you're around 80 to 100 grams, you might want to think about going in all the way or getting the hell away kind of idea.
Yeah. Well, brain needs around 150 grams. So if you don't have that in your nutrition, it's going to make it from somewhere. Uh,
Yeah.
just like a week or 2 weeks ago, I heard this one doctor talking about how uh, people, women specifically, shouldn't take too much protein because protein will be turned into fat. So they need to buy this amino acids that he promotes. And amino
Nice.
acids costs $130 for 30 servings. And I'm like,
I wonder if he knows protein is amino acids.
God help us all. I'm like, how could, what, on what planet? And these are the doctors, you know,
Yeah.
675,000 people following this guy.
Oh my God.
And he's talking about how protein is going to make you fat, so you need to take amino acids instead.
They have done research on higher protein diets, and the thermic effect of food gets as high as 25% when you have a higher protein diet from 10.
Well,
So if you have
ISSN
a
did
10%,
5 years of 6 grams per kilo,
yeah,
and all they got it was people just get more jacked and leaner.
yeah, 100%. Yeah. Because everybody has this idea that protein is only for muscle. No, those amino acids are for everything.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how they get these followers, but I mean, I see a lot of very important, or I don't know if important's the right word. I see a lot of very popular influencers that have this following. I'm like, how the fuck did they get that? Who's
It's
following this
it.
advice?
Uh, I think that the title is usually like scary something. Like somebody shared ages ago about how energy drinks are killing your gains, and I'm like, did you read the study? They literally put a cell of mouse in a tray and dunked it for 3 days, and the cell died. But the title says energy drinks kill your muscle, and you're like, on what planet? Or this other one, I just watched I think it was RP Strengths that shared it, is that if you do cold exposure, you're going to gain fat. The study never mentions any of that. It mentions if you are in ice cold water for 30 minutes, you are more likely to consume around nearly 1,000 calories more after that exposure to that cold.
Yeah.
Never in the
The body just
methodology mentions gaining fat or anything. I'm like, yeah, put anyone in a cold state, they're going to eat more to warm up.
yeah, they're going to shiver away hundreds of calories just by trying to stay warm.
And this is absurdity of like people. Uh, I
I
think
have never been a fan of anything. I don't see much of anything that RP does, but there's a lot of crap coming out of that
no,
out of
it
there.
have a lot of value, obviously, but it's just at this point, a majority of how do you even call them influencers or whatever, they're just shooting for titles. They just
I
shooting
think
for some kind of nonsense. And when you actually have a brain to open up the study and read about methodology and results and whatnot, it doesn't come to tuition.
yeah, yep. I really don't think there's been anything new in the last few decades as of any relevance.
Yeah.
It's always been the same. It's just been repackaged and sold as something new and exciting, and it's not. It's already been here and done, but it's not exciting and sexy, so it doesn't make money.
I'll just try to wrap up what you said is basically if you follow your menstrual cycle, more often than not, it's not as important. But if you want to be really precise, there could be a difference that can be made following up different phases, right?
I think it's important no matter what. I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze for everybody. I think it depends because it does require a little bit more detailed micromanaging for sure, but you will get benefit out of it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, Scott, and we'll dig deeper in next videos.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.